Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual classroom. I hope, as usual, you all are doing well. And always, if you have questions, if you have issues or concerns, please never hesitate to reach out and find me in email, in our discussion community. We can meet on Zoom, we can visit, we can meet in person if you happen to be in Crete. Whatever you need, I am here for you. We are about that time of the semester. We're about almost halfway through, and things are starting to get real because we're starting to now take what we've been discussing somewhat theoretically, abstractly, and we're going to start applying it here to our understanding of writing and producing our own work on the page. And so to do that, we're gonna return to In the Waiting Room this week, as you may have already been experiencing with your assignments this week. So if you recall, a few weeks ago, you read In the Waiting Room the first time. It's relatively short, and but it's also one of those stories that you can kind of pass over very easily, very quickly, and not think much about. It is a funny story about a guy sitting in a waiting room. No one will argue that. You know, it's a guy that doesn't speak the language and therefore winds up in a bunch of kind of embarrassing, silly situations that on their own, individually, don't particularly relate to one another. And yet, as we've been discussing the last few weeks, we have to assume everything is in there on purpose, right? That's an important thing to think about as we move into our discussion this week, and then as we start writing about In the Waiting Rooms, we start analyzing it for our paper together. You have to imagine, nothing's accidental, right? Remember, in the last few weeks, we've been gathering narrative knowledge. We've been looking at how stories work. We've been looking at how nonfiction stories are often structured and arranged, and we heard things in there like stories are about change. Remember, stories take place within a certain time period, A to B. And what you need for a story is for something to be different. And often in nonfiction, that difference is up here in the writer's mind. Okay? And so within the scope of that, how is David Sedaris, the author, the narrative voice, the storyteller, how is the storyteller different from the beginning of this story to the end of the story? What has the author figured out? Remember, that's one of the things we discussed a few weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago, about nonfiction, that the plot of a nonfiction narrative is often, if not always, the kind of the track of the writer's thinking. The writer is figuring something out, and it only seems accidentally meaningful, right? It only seems random. That's part of the art. That's part of the creative aspect of it. But we have to assume everything is in there. I think Annie Dillard said that. Everything is in there in service of idea. What she meant was everything's in there on purpose. We have to assume the writer meant to do everything. So what that means is for us to analyze this story rhetorically, as we've been doing this week, right? That's why I've asked you to take a paragraph and analyze it for its purpose, or for its content and its function. In other words, what is your paragraph saying, and what is that paragraph doing? And that's kind of a blunt instrument to get us discussing what choices did the author make, and how do those choices help us understand what's really going on in this story. Okay, we know what it's about, but what's it really about? And remember last week, I believe, we looked at how writers, in particular nonfiction writers who want to write about difficult material, whether it's embarrassing or personal or hard to describe, we often borrow tools and techniques from Gothic horror, and we show the monster right in plain sight. And it's a really powerful tool sometimes if you want to write about something that's personal, if you want to write about something that's delicate and private, and you want to write about it in a way that helps you make sense of it, but doesn't risk your psyche, doesn't embarrass you, doesn't at least you're able to talk about yourself in a way that's comfortable for you, right? And I shared some examples of my students who wrote very personal stories about very personal, true stories about their struggles and how they overcame them, but found a way not to include things they weren't comfortable sharing. And that's perfectly okay, because they were able to tell perfectly true, authentic, powerful stories that still address the idea, but didn't risk their emotional well-being. And I think David Sedaris is doing the same thing in this story. There's a lot going on here. And the reason I like it being short, the reason I have asked you to ask us to look at a short story like this, a short essay, a short article, is we can now today go into it line by line and paragraph by paragraph and ask questions about why is the author doing that? Why did Sedaris start there? Why did the author end the paragraph there? Okay. So I'm going to lead us through this, and hopefully this will start to provide some context and connect all of the says and does paragraph analysis that each of you did individually. I'm going to kind of join the party here a little bit and kind of walk us through the story and show you how to read it rhetorically. In other words, we're going to take everything we learned about how stories work, right? Conflict, rising action, epiphany, climax, resolution, change, causality, plot, trouble is interesting, figuring something out, going from A to B within a certain period of time. All those things we've learned about stories, all that narrative knowledge. Now we're going to reread this story. And by the end of this video, I think hopefully maybe you'll be surprised by what is actually really going on in this story. Okay, so we're going to try. And this will set the stage then as we move into writing about In the Waiting Room. And we're going to do that step by step as well. We're not going to rush it. I'm not just going to say, okay, go write about it. We're going to then take a step back in weeks to come and say, okay, we want to write about this. What tools do we need? How are we going to convey what we now know about the story to our audience, right? So I want to make sure you understand, like, this, everything about this course is developed to help us focus on process, not just writing a bunch of pages, right? It's thinking about every step along the way. Believe it or not, we're writing our paper right now. We were writing our paper last week and the week before that and the week before that, right? Writing begins a long time before your fingers touch a keyboard, okay? That's important to think about. There's planning and there's research and there's preparation. If you've ever struggled with writer's block, often you just simply don't know what you're trying to say yet. You haven't done enough research, you haven't done enough preparation, you don't know what you want to say, and it shows. And so we're going to spend a little more time on that next week. How do we come up with a topic? Even if we know kind of what we want to write about, how do we turn that into a form that works? That's where we're going to go next week. And so we're going to slowly get more and more practical here as we move along. Okay. So with that in mind, let's talk about In the Waiting Room, one of my favorite stories, in part because it captures all of the things that we've been talking about this semester so far in a really fun way. And it's a perfect example of a writer externalizing an internal struggle that is really private and personal, and kind of naming his demons and taking some control over them and saying, I know what I need to do. You're like, you might be thinking, that's in this story? I'll show you. Okay. So let me pull up in the waiting room and let me share my screen here. And there we go. All right. In the waiting room. Wonderful, wonderful story. All right. Now let's start with the opening paragraph. Okay. Let's not even start with the opening paragraph. Let's start with the opening line of the story. 6 months after moving to Paris, I gave up on French school and decided to take the easy way out. Let's just stop there for a second. Don't worry about the rest of the story. Let's analyze that opening line. If we assume that everything in that sentence is on purpose, is intentional, then every word choice was a choice, was a conscious decision. There are any number of other ways David Sedaris could have said that and meant roughly the same thing. 6 months after moving to Paris, I stopped going to French school. 6 months after moving to Paris, I quit trying to learn the language, something like that. But that's not what David Sedaris said. He said, I gave up on French school. He could have stopped there, by the way. I just gave up. But he didn't just give up. I gave up and took the easy way out. You're like, yeah, so what? Here's the thing. What he has just done in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 words. What he's done in 20 words is define who this character is at point A, the start of the story. Who is David Sedaris? When things get tough, what does he do? Does he stick with it? Does he fight? Does he endure? Does he do the heroic thing? No. He gives up. And he runs away. And he surrenders. And he takes the easy way out. That's who this character is, right? That's important. Now we have a wonderful before picture that we can contrast at the end of the story or later in the story with who this author at least wants to be at the end, right? So think about that. We now know who this character is in the first sentence. When things get tough, gives up and runs away, takes the easy way out, right? Because early, then he goes on to talk about in this paragraph, he has no, right? He doesn't think it's that big a deal. But here's what I want you to take a look at. Where the rest of that paragraph, what is the result? So let's say the opening paragraph, he takes the easy way out. That's the first thing we know. What's the result of that surrender? What does he start to do? He doesn't know the language. So his answer is, well, I'll just say okay. That's what d'accord means, right? D'accord. So he doesn't know the language. So he just starts agreeing with everything. That's the result. So the first thing he does is he takes the easy way out. What's the immediate result of that? Let's come up with a word for it. The only thing he can do is say okay. The only thing he can do is say yes. He can't question. He can't refuse. He can't ask for something else. He can't stand up for himself. He is powerless. In the scope of the limits of this story, the immediate result of taking the easy way out is powerlessness. Here's what I mean. If it's the middle of the night and you're hungry and you go to the refrigerator to grab something to eat and there's day-old cold pizza and a bowl of broccoli and you eat the broccoli because you're trying to be healthy, that's a choice. If you go to the refrigerator in the middle of the night and there's only a bowl of broccoli and and there's nothing else and you eat the broccoli, that's not a choice. That's a lack of options, right? This is what Sedaris has done. Because he took the easy way out, he does not have choice. He's powerless. And what is the result of that powerlessness? If you look at everything that happens to him, is it good? Or is it something else? Take a look at the next paragraph. Well, before we get to there, look at the end, the last sentence of this opening paragraph. The word was a key to a magic door. And every time I said it, I felt the thrill of possibility. That's a strange tone, isn't it? Keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to revisit that. But look at what happens. Because he takes the easy way out, therefore he's powerless. Because he's powerless, what happens? Well, the first thing that happens is this weird thing with the concierge of this hotel. Now, first of all, maybe you don't know what a concierge is. A concierge of a hotel is like, it's the front desk, right? They are there to be at your beck and call. They are literally there to serve every need of the hotel guests. That's why they're there. They're there to help you get tickets to a show in town. They're help you find an Uber or a cab. They're there to get you extra towels. They do the wake up call. They get you extra cleaning service in your room, laundry, whatever you need. You call the concierge and they serve you. But because he's powerless, what has happened? The concierge asks him to serve them. He becomes the servant of the servant. Imagine you're at a hotel. Just imagine you're staying at a hotel. And on the way out the door, you're getting ready to pay your bill, and you turn in your room key card, and you're walking out the door. And before you can get to the front door, the concierge, the front desk person says, "Hey, before you leave, could you help us clean the bathroom?" What would you say? Of course you'd say no. What does he say? Okay. See what I mean? When you take the easy way out, you're powerless. And when you're powerless, bad things happen. Like that. Like this horrific dental procedure. These are all bad things, right? Right. And then look what he says about the dentist. He gets all these, think how scary that is. He gets his teeth cut open and he has to have stitches in his gums. And the best thing he can say about it, not that he's upset, not that he regrets it, not that he wishes he'd have learned the language. No, he says, well, it gave me something to talk about on television. And for that, I was grateful. Oh, right? What does it say about his state of mind at this point? How defeated he is. How little agency he has in his life, right? I mean, how little confidence he has. This is one of the most famous authors in the world. If you go to any Barnes and Noble, anywhere, go back to the essays section, you'll find several of his books. You'll find the book that this story was published in originally, or eventually. It was originally in the New Yorker magazine, right? He's as successful as you can be as an author. And he needs his stitches to talk about on television. And then look at the last sentence. We're meant to look at that. It gave me something to talk about, and for that I was grateful. Every time I said okay, I felt the thrill of possibility, and I'm grateful for the stitches. Notice the pattern developing at the end of these paragraphs? Keep that in mind. Look at the next paragraph. I said the cord to a waiter and received a pig's nose standing erect on a bed of tender greens. I said it to a woman in a department store and got drenched in cologne. Every day it was an adventure. He ends the paragraph again with, I'm fine. I like it this way. Thrill of possibility. I was grateful. Every day was an adventure. That's not accidental. That's on purpose. But let's look at the details of that paragraph because they're not good things. The pig's nose. It's not just he was served a pig's nose. It was standing erect on a bed of tender greens. The nose was turned up at him. Now think, when you turn your nose up at something, what does that mean? You're disgusted. Even this dead animal is disgusted with him. It introduces that imagery kind of in the back door, right? Sedaris doesn't see it yet, the character, but we do. because we know how to read it, right? Sedaris is making us see this. This is a character who's slowly starting to figure something out. I'm going to show you what I mean. But look away, drenched in cologne. Why do we wear cologne? You didn't have to include that. But we got to explain why it's in there. Why do we wear cologne? Why do we wear deodorant? Why do we, right? To smell better, to smell different from natural, to cover up. It's a mask. It's a mask. It's a mask. The question is, it's a cover for what? Look at the next paragraph. He says the cord, and he has a kidney stone, right? And he gets hooked to a Demerol drip, which is a painkiller. And look at what he says. That was undoubtedly the best thing that Decord got me. He's in Paris, France. This is a pretty cool place. And the best thing that saying yes got him was a painkiller. How do we explain that? I mean, it might just feel good, but in the structure of the story here, I thought he was living life. I thought he was happy, right? He's been saying this whole time that he's happy, right? Look at the ends of these paragraphs. You look at the end of the Demerol paragraph, top of the next page. I said it, I supersized, I said okay one more time and said génial, which means great, right? He's saying to you, I like it this way. I like being powerless. I like getting all these, unfortunate things happening because it's like a magic door, the thrill of possibility. And I'm grateful for these adventures and every day was an adventure. And then great, happy, 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 happy. And yet the best thing that Decord got him was something that numbs pain. We got a word for that. It's called denial. He's in denial. We see it, right? It's like what he's saying doesn't match what he's going through. It's hard to believe him. I don't believe you, bro. It's in denial. And I'm going to prove it to you. He's not being truthful with himself. He's not self-aware yet. Look at what happens at the top of the next page. So he has to go back to the doctor now for a follow-up appointment. And of course, he still doesn't understand the language. And the nurse says something, and he's led into this room. And look at the last sentence of this paragraph. As the woman turned to leave, she said something else. And looking back, I really should have asked her to repeat it. To draw a picture if that's what it took. Because once you take your pants off, the cord really isn't okay anymore. You see what just happened? Everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. It's not okay anymore. What just happened? What just started to happen in the structure of the essay? The structure of the essay is helping us see it. I like it this way, I like it this way, I like it this way, I like it this way. I don't like it this way. Change. Change has started to happen in the story. See what I mean? It's right there at the end of the paragraph. The pattern shifted. That's the key here. The structure of the story forced us to see this pattern of attitude, and the pattern of attitude changed, and therefore change has begun. He's starting to figure it out as a character. Now it's a slow burn. It doesn't happen overnight. We don't just, figure things out right away. So he's in this, doctor's office like you are, and he doesn't know what he's supposed to do. And so this is the 3 doors paragraph, right? And he's trying to figure out where to go. And it's this funny thing where he's standing there listening at the doors, and look at what he says. So he's still trying to hide and run away and find the safest thing, right? He's still trying to take the easy way out, but he's running out of choices again. Look at what he says there. I put my ear against each one, trying to determine which was the safest for someone in my condition. That's an odd word choice. Now, listen, condition he could just be a funny word, right? But his condition literally here is he's in his underpants. his word, right? Because it's funny. It's also somewhat childlike, that word, not accidental. Immature, that word. He uses the word condition. When you hear the word condition, there's a connotation there. What do you think of? I think of like you have a heart condition or a lung condition or a brain condition or a, you know what I mean? You don't have a clothes condition. You don't have a naked condition. That's what he's got. The truth is starting to leak out, right? The denial is starting to crack here. Little by little, change. See what I'm saying? Slowly starting to come out. And then look at the next paragraph. Now, you might have read this. I'm assuming you all read this. You might have read this paragraph and go, why is this in here? And that's a fair question because I read this several times. I've read this story a bunch, and I've taught it a lot. And it took me a long time to figure out why this paragraph was in there. But because this couple has no relation to him, they're just random people they're just randos in the waiting room. But look at don't focus on them. Focus on what Sedaris's mind is doing. What is Sedaris focused on? How they're dressed. And he talks about how nicely dressed they were. No sneakers or sweatsuits. Yes, he envies their clothes, right? So here's the thing. One of the tricks in storytelling is if you want to convey want, like deep want and desire, you describe the heck out of it, right? Because that's what our brains do, right? If we really want something or something's really powerful, adrenaline and other things allow us to take in more input, right? And that's what he's doing. Yes, he envies their clothes, but it's not just that they're dressed. They're dressed nicely. They match. They're coordinated. In other words, they have everything in life that he doesn't. Clothes, yes, but control and agency in their own lives. He's sitting there in his underpants, embarrassed in public, because a long time ago, he gave up power. He could have done the work and learned the language and he wouldn't be sitting there. He doesn't get it yet, but we do. See what I mean? That's what he really envies here. Not just their clothes, but the fact that they're coordinated, that they were put together, that they were matching. And then look at the next paragraph. He doesn't know what to say. But look at the end of it. And he finally admits something to you. Because I should have gone and I was supposed to put the robe on. So he's got a problem, right? He's figured out, I could go back. Could he fix his problem? Yes. He could go back and get the robe. It would take 5 seconds. No one would care. We would all do it. But look at what he says. Look at what he says. I wanted more than anything to go back and get the robe. But if I did, this 2 people would see my mistake because they're paying all this attention to me. We're going to come back to that in a minute. They think I was stupid. So to prove them wrong, I decided to sit right where I was and pretend everything was normal. Pretend, that's how he ends that paragraph. Pretend everything's normal. He admits it. He's been in denial. He's not happy. He doesn't like how things are, but he's faking it, which is why Demerol was so powerful, because it gave him a break from having to fake feeling good. Right? Now look at the next paragraph. It's funny the things that run through your mind when you're in this situation. Suicide comes up. It does? Really? First of all, what does this show? Look at the depths of his problem, of his condition. We've all had embarrassing moments in public, right? We've all had embarrassing moments. You walk into the wrong restroom, you trip over a sidewalk crack, whatever. The first thing that comes to mind is not this, but it is for the character. This is a deep problem. It's funny. I mean, if we can say that in the context of the story, but it's, again, the monster's right here, right? This is a problem he's got. This is a real condition. And there's hints at it. He's starting to get it, and very quickly. After this white space on the next page, we see where it is. Look what happens. This thought of hurting himself brings back a memory from 35 years ago. 35 years ago. He remembers the year. What does that tell us? That it left a mark. That is, this has haunted him. And look at what he says. He's eating his sister's birthday party, and he's eating this big chunk of beef, and his look at what his mother, he remembers exactly what his mother says to him. I hope you choke to death, she said. I was right. I was 12 years old and paused, thinking, did I hear her correctly? That's right, piggy. Suffocate. So his mother said. And he remembers the day, he remembers the event, he remembers the year. This has affected him. We're getting real close to the epiphany moment. We're getting real close to that turning point. He's about to realize something that he can't unrealize, and it's in the next paragraph. Now, this next paragraph, you might fly over that. You could read that quick and it wouldn't, right? Let me read it two different ways. In that moment, I hoped I would choke to death. The knot of beef would lodge itself in my throat, and for the rest of her life, my mother would feel haunted and responsible. Every time she passed a steakhouse or browsed the meat counter of a grocery store, she'd think of me and reflect upon what she'd said. The words hope and death in the same sentence. But of course, I hadn't choked. Instead, I lived and grew to adulthood so that I could sit here in this waiting room dressed in nothing but my underpants. You just fly right over it because you're interested in being done. But slow that down. This is a powerful, potentially heroic monologue. Right? What does he wish he would have done? He wishes that he'd have died. Why? Not to escape, but because it would have been the hard, difficult thing to do. And it would have made him memorable. He would have haunted her. She would have remembered what she said. I'd be gone, he says, but I'd be memorable. Right? People remember that. Let me read it differently. Before I do, have any of you seen the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe? There's a wonderful speech that the character gives in there where he confronts the emperor of Rome, and he promises the emperor that he will get revenge for all of the wrong done to him and his family at the order of this young snotty emperor. And Russell Crowe, the gladiator, takes his helmet off and he says, "My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the north, general of the Felix legions, servant to the true emperor Marcus Aurelius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next." That's what heroes say, right? And of course he did, because he's the hero. That's almost what Sedaris says here. Let me read it differently with direct address. I will choke to death. The knot of beef will lodge itself in my throat. For the rest of your life, you will feel haunted and responsible. Every time you pass a steakhouse or browse a meat counter at a grocery store, you will think of me and reflect upon what you've said. The words hope and death in the same sentence. I will do it, and you will think of me. You'll remember this day, right? But then he qualifies it. But of course, I hadn't choked. Because that's not what I do. Now he's finally getting it. Instead, I lived and grew to adulthood so that I could sit in this waiting room dressed in nothing but my underpants. Oh my God, I'm sitting here. Because ever since then, what have I been doing? Just been saying okay. I've just been giving everyone else power over me. You can't unthink that. You can't unrealize that. What his mother said was horrible, but he's been letting it haunt him ever since. And it's been affecting the way he's living his life. That's the epiphany moment. How do I know? Look at the rest of the story. What does he come? He comes out of that memory. What's he notice? He spends several paragraphs describing how no one's paying attention to him. What was he worried about before with that couple and everything else? He was worried about being embarrassed. He was worried about being noticed. He was worried about looking stupid. He was worried about having something to talk about on television. What's he worried about after that moment, after that memory? He's worried about being unmemorable because he realizes no one cares about him. No one's paying attention. He's not living memorably. And look at that paragraph that I've circled. How conceited I am to think I might be remembered. He has gone from denial to self-awareness. He's figured something out. And look at the end of that paragraph right there at the bottom. People are going to leave this waiting room and they're going to go into the streets, and any number of things are going to wipe me from their memory. Any number of things. Now, he doesn't pick any number. He picks 2. So basically, he's realized I've got a problem. I am powerless because I take the easy way out and I'm living an unmemorable life. That's what this is about. How he's living his life. He's figured it out. But now how does he fix it? And here is where the dog and the woman come into play. You might say, okay, let's talk about the dog and the woman. Now, the dog, let's take that first. What does the dog represent? Now it's funny because it's got it's got 3 legs, the easy thing for that dog to do would just be lay in the backyard and, not do anything, just be a 3-legged dog, not go for walks. The easy thing for the owner to do, if he wanted to keep it, was just to let it sit around the house. But they wanted to go for walks. So look at the top of the next page. Look at what that quote, that the owner of the dog does not say that. That is the end of the paragraph again. That is from the mind of the author. Then there was the dog's owner who looked at his pet and then looked at me with an expression reading, "That's okay, I took care of it." What's it? The problem. Dog had 3 legs. We wanted to go for walks. I made it a leg. Had a problem? Fix it. How do you live a memorable life? Fix your problems. Learn the language. Go put the robe on. Fix your problems. And then look at the rest about the woman, right? There's a couple paragraphs about this at the end. What does she represent? And he's thinking about this, right? She's passed out. And then look at the end of this paragraph. Look at the last bit. He's like trying to wrestle with, why am I remembering this? Why is it sticking with me? And he said, did the leaves on the sidewalk contribute to my sense of utter delight, or was it the goblet? Remember, she's drinking water out of a glass goblet, and the dignity it bespoke. This has nothing to do with him or the story, but he forces it in here with this. This is, again, Sedaris thinking. Yes, you may be on the ground. Yes, this drink may be your last, but let's do it right, shall we? If this is the end, if this is the last drink of water you're ever going to have, do you really want to drink it out of a cheap plastic bottle? If you want to live a memorable life, fix your problems and go through tough things with dignity. Like this woman who's collapsed on the street. He doesn't know this might be the end of her life, but she's going to go out fixing her hair, drinking out of a goblet. And he can't forget it. Now, Sedaris hasn't done any of this yet, but he's realized what he has to do. I've got a problem and I know how to fix it. That's a lot of change in 2 pages, right? Because look at the end, look at what he says. The only person who he's haunting right now, not his mom, it's him. Because of the regret, because of things he wishes he would have done, because of these embarrassing moments that he allows himself to find himself in because he takes the easy way out and makes himself powerless. See what I mean? That's a big deal. That's a lot of meaning packed into a couple funny pages, right? When you have narrative knowledge, when you know how to read the meaning behind the words, there's a lot going on in here. This is a really well-written story. And So the great thing about being a recording is as we start writing about this, we've essentially written the paper. Okay, we've written the analysis. You can go back, we can go back and reference this video and reference the says and does paragraphs that we worked on. But that's for next week. Okay, so I will see you all very soon. Have a wonderful, wonderful week and take care, everyone. More soon.